I think we will make a start, and people can join in, further people can join in should they choose to in due course. Welcome, my name is Jonathan Hill, and I am the Director of the Institute of Middle Eastern Studies at King's College London, and it is my very great pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event on the enduring legacies of the Arabian Nights, which is being held in partnership with the Sheikh Zayed Book Award, one of the Arab world's most prestigious and well-funded prizes, book prizes. We are very grateful to welcome our speaker this evening, Professor Muhsin Al-Musawi, winner of the 2022 Sheikh Zayed Book Award for Arabic Culture in Other Languages. And he will be in conversation with Haya Alfarhan, who is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Comparative Literature here at King's College London. Professor Al-Musawi is a professor of classical and modern Arabic, literature, comparative and cultural studies at Columbia University in New York, and the author of around 100 books and scholarly articles. He is also the recipient of the 2002 Awais Award in Literary Criticism, 2018 Kuwait Prize in Arabic Language and Literature, and the 2022 King Faisal International Prize for Arabic Literature in English. We are indeed very fortunate to have him here speaking to us this evening. The event itself will take the form of a fireside chat, which is a type of directed conversation between Professor Al-Musawi and Haya, and will last for somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes, which should then leave time for any questions from you, the audience members, at the end. If you do have any questions for Professor Al-Musawi, please can you pose them via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you just click on there and type your question or your comment in, and then we will get to those at the end. In addition, there is an Arabic language version of tonight's events being provided via the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. And the simultaneous translation will be provided by Tarek Galmaran. So many thanks to him for doing that. Okay, without any further ado, it is my very great pleasure to hand over to our guests, and I will hand over to Haya. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It is an honor to be in conversation with Professor Musawi regarding his remarkable new book, The Arabian Nights in Contemporary World Cultures, Global Commodification, Translation, and the Culture Industry. Hello, Professor Musawi, how are you?
Thank you, Haya. Thank you so much. Great to see you.
So I will start with a general question, which is what drew you to this project? What was the impetus for it? Because you've worked on the Arabian Nights before. And as you highlight in your work, it's not particularly a text that hasn't been given enough attention, but there's clearly something that's being missed in the scholarship that you take great lengths and sort of uncover with great care. So if you can just start with that.
Yeah, that's quite true. I mean, I have been working on the Arabian Nights for a long time, certainly, and very many books have come out, whether in English or Arabic, alongside the other commitments which I have to Arabic literature in general, whether it is poetry or fiction and so on. So all this has been taking place at the same time, and the conversation is usually takes place whenever there is something which I feel urgent enough to respond to. So when my first book on the Arabian Nights came out, there wasn't actually a book in English dealing with that. You know, that was Shahrazad in England, right now reprinted by Peter Lang under the Arabian Nights in English Literary Theory. And with a new chapter being added, which I published that chapter also early on in my life, that is 1981. That kind of interest, certainly, as I told you, I mean, it started a field. It started a field. That is to say, nobody cared about the Arabian Nights, and actually, even the university I was attending at that time was not very enthusiastic about the topic. I mean, you know, but because all they know about the Arabian Nights is the thief of Baghdad, for instance, something like that. So that very little, very little. In Arabic itself, with the exception of the doctoral dissertation by Suhair Qalamawi, there was almost nothing. In fact, I mean, it was marginalized. It was never mentioned in the academy at all. So with the publication of my book, and the circulation was not good, I must admit, simply because the publisher at that time, Washington, 3 continents, Herdek, the late Herdek, was professor of Isra poetry in general, and he got into the 3 continents kind of literature and interest. So that was the interest which led him to publications. And Isa Bulata, the late Isa Bulata, wrote to me asking me that it is good to publish the book with Herdek, which I did. As I told you, the circulation was not as excellent as we expected, but very many people will catch up later, like Peter Caracciolio from London University, for instance. Later on, he wrote to me apologizing that he didn't really know about the book until some time that is very late, when they published a book about Arabian Nights in English literature, a collection of articles and so on. So what I'm saying here is that it was kind of a very belated kind of interest in the Arabian Nights in the academy. And so after that, no, there were very many other publications, articles, and so on, dissertations everywhere in North America and Europe, and wherever you go, there is something. Abridgments, companions, and so on. So that is something. But at that time also, I felt very interested in another dimension, which has been kind of neglected, the Islamic element. This is why I wrote about it, the Islamic context of the 1001 Nights, published by Columbia University Press, and so on. But nevertheless, the urging, the very urgent question at that time was why the accumulation of books in the academy, and why the new interest of the academy in the Arabian Nights. I mean, we put aside the commercial side, that is to say, courses on the Arabian Nights will be well received by students and so on. And so for that matter, scholars will find something easy also to handle, or they thought it is easy to handle, and so on. And that is one side of it, but we are talking about something else, the development in criticism itself. That is to say, if we look back at the 19th century in Europe generally speaking, and the periodical criticism at that time, which was enormous, kind of, you can't believe it. I mean, prominent journals were devoting at least 3, 4, 5 articles every year to the Arabian Nights, and even newspapers and so on. So what is the new development? The new development is a little bit, as I told you, first of all, the shift to the academy. So we have a new field. The other thing, newspapers and whatever are taking care of the Arabian Nights. The other thing is the cinema itself, a different interest and adaptation, a rewriting of the Arabian Nights. Alongside this, there were new abridgments, retranslation, and so on. Everybody was claiming as if Richard Burton was not enough and was not setting the terminus for the claims for translations. But the most prominent, I feel, critic of the Arabian Nights was actually Borges, because he did a lot in order to understand the Arabian Nights differently. So he set the mode for the modernist, the modern and the postmodern tradition of reading. That is the thing. However, he was not really taken very seriously, and he was neglected for a long time too. But this is why I thought, let me resurrect Borges, That is one side of the new dealing. At the same time, look at it from a different angle. That is to say, the post-industrial, post-capitalist society. What is the conception? What is that kind of attitude? How we look at it in broader terms, from the terms which we know and which we associated with colonialism and colonial expansion and all that kind of, and the theories of translation, that is the appearance of translation or the translator as a second author. So we need to look at the other side, because there are new translations or claims to translations in different languages. So an upsurge, actually, kind of interest in the Arabian Nights is taking place. But as I told you, the most important item which I felt is that we are dealing with a different kind of consumer this time. And the consumer is no longer merely an individual. We are talking about publics, companies, and so on. All these I'm taking into consideration in the new effort.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about what you just said is a description of the Arabian Nights not as text, but almost as an industry, a self-sustaining industry in itself.
Right, that is quite true, yeah.
Yeah, so I think what I'm interested in hearing you talk more about in terms of this idea of the Arabian Nights beyond its the conception of it in the 18th and 19th century, in this moment that you're discussing now, what is the worldliness that it's it's defining? What about it as a text? How is it recreating the world in its own image?
Yeah, that is different. Certainly, that is a different direction which I am taking care of also in the book, because what I noticed is that when it comes to the theorists of literature, generally speaking, the Arabian Nights is put aside. It's not mentioned. It's not mentioned. Even the narratology, which is an important field, certainly, and has been growing and developing, making use of French theory, but also Anglo-Saxon something, is developing and growing. But again, the Arabian Nights is missing. The problem with that kind is how to decolonize this kind of theory. And narratology in particular, knowing that the Arabian Nights actually helped in the development of fictional literature in Europe. Remember that when the Arabian Nights was first translated, that is, we are talking about 704, for instance, 712, when we are talking, there was no such thing as fiction as we understand it. And so the later growth and the connection between these, the Arabian Nights and individual tales like Sindbad, voyages, for instance, so on, all of them gave the vent to a new style, a new direction in narrative, aside from the characters. Characters are multiple, and there is a great variety of characters in the Arabian Nights and settings and so on. All of these are needed, much needed by fiction. Later critics will notice that, certainly, and will deal with that and the significance of that. This is why some of them were so enthusiastic as to speak of the Arabian Nights as the mother of fiction as we understand it, the European type. Anyway, so that was a direction. Right now, to me, it is how, first of all, to divest the text itself from what is associated with it. That especially the annotation, the amount of annotation, which translators, in order to claim that they are Arabists and so on, they need to do. And they have been doing. That is to say, they put a lot of effort in that kind of documentation, which is disputable. As you know, sometimes really they go to kind of platitudes, but sometimes make very important contributions, and on other times they put their own insights and leanings, like what Burton did when it comes to anthropology and so on. So we have all these. So what we need to do is, first of all, to resurrect the text again, read it again, read it differently, and see exactly what is there. Then the question will arise, what text we are talking about when we don't have a manuscript a real one manuscript that is before what Galan came across and translated. That is a late 14th, early 15th century kind of text. How is it possible to speak about that? How to retain that kind of authentic text? There is no such thing as authentic text. It is impossible to claim it. Is there a manuscript or not? That is all. And the manuscript doesn't mean that this is really a kind of pure text which we need to rely on. As long as we are talking about storytelling, the question itself cannot reach very definitive conclusions simply because they don't exist. They don't exist. So we are talking about that kind of navigation between orality and literacy, which is, as you know, it is a borderline, but at the same time, it's fractural in the sense that you cannot come with definite conclusions regarding that. Now, certainly another objection will be raised against that this is not true, because if we accept what Nabi Abu, that is, from Chicago University, born in Mosul in Iraq, and if we accept her article, very important article, 1949, when she came across a fragment of a manuscript, a fragment, but very important fragment. Very important fragment because it said these are stories or tales from the 1001 Nights. Meaning then there is already, and we are talking about early 9th century, there is already something existing before that, which is a complete version. Very important for us to notice that. So there is then a text, a written, according to her, and she is a specialist, as you know, in manuscripts. She thinks that that was the first, after the Quran, documentation of something written on paper. Very important, right? That is very important for us to notice and to see exactly what is what. And yeah, as I told you, so there is a question about what do we mean. Nevertheless, what we have at least is the manuscript, the Galant manuscript, and we can work with that. At the same time, we have the other manuscripts, which even if we claim they are fabricated or collected in the second half of the 18th century, that's fine. We can deal with them. We can deal with them. So we go to the text and try to do our new analysis of them as narrative. So beyond what is written about them, not as narrative at that time. As you know, 19th century interest was a little different from the 18th century and so on. So a new development then in fiction and writing is there. And we need to take lead from there and develop our own narratology and force ourselves on the narratological thinking and bring the academy to understand that it is no longer tenable to speak only about a few specific texts simply because such and such writer, prominent as he or she is, wrote about that kind of text. No, there are things which are very important, even if they were neglected by the Arabs themselves. Nevertheless, there is something very important for us to notice. There is something, though, which I also, apart from narratology, which I also detected, that is there, since we are talking about what is authentic and what is not, there is a chapter which I wrote about the archaeology of the Arabian Nights. And it is a huge chapter, certainly, but what is important about that, I think, is that I reread what was written in the 10th century. And I read Al-Masoudi differently. That is, Hammer read it certainly, and he was the one who led us all to that text, which the Arabs never noticed or never cared for it anyway. So, and other scholars, but Hammer did, von Hammer, that is. But in that text, though, Al-Masoudi was saying that in the Umayyad period, storytellers noticed that the emirs and sultans and whatever nobilities and so on, these people were interested in something if it is claimed to be translated. And so they love tales which they tell them that is, these are translated from Indian or Persian. Meaning what? Then the question of Hazar Afsan should be taken very seriously again and investigated. We don't have a manuscript for Hazar Afsan. And even if Ibn Nadim will tell us that he read it, he cannot be sure whether that was a translation or whatever. It has only a Persian name on it. That's all. Meaning what? It is quite possible that it is also fabricated by these people, storytellers, in order to sell themselves and to make good money. And that is my suggestion. As long as we are talking about an urban space that is growing and that there is a reception for narrative of that kind of for storytelling, then we should expect that along with that kind of conception, there is a lot of fabrication and forgery and claims, false claims, and so
on. What's really interesting about what you brought up about the archaeology of Arabian Nights and sort of the probing into its origin as perhaps almost a hoax in terms of its translated origins, is that it kind of mirrors what you're sort of articulating about how it exists in the current moment as an industry in itself in terms of how layered it is. So that's kind of the thread of continuity of the text, really, is that's the character that hasn't changed, even though it's all in question. And to me, one of the interesting aspects of your book is that you not only are somehow chronicling and charting the text in terms of its reception, its relationship to scholarship, but all the different domains and lives that it has had. So sort of where it stands in relation to 18th and 19th century readership and reception versus the current moment. And I guess I wanted to ask you if you could sort of, just as a almost playful gesture, pick like 2 or 3 moments in the life of the text and the domains that it has dwelled in that you find fascinating or key in understanding its enduring presence almost. So whether that be the early translations or sort of its adaptations or its relationship to the endurance of Shahrazad, whatever that may be.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is definitely, sorry for the interruption. This is a call from Baghdad, actually, which I have been expecting, but that is what it is. Anyway, it came late, or I told them that I'll be absent for 2 hours. Anyway, but that is something. Yeah, I mean, the moment, certainly the biggest moment in the history of the Arabian Nights is Galan's coming on that kind of occasion. That is coming and approaching the text and providing the European public with a text. That is the most important detail, regardless of what is being said about Galan. It doesn't matter at all. I mean, whether it is an exact, a good, a loyal, faithful, no, or not to translate. This is not a question. First of all, Galan was the closest to the text, just opposite of what other claims have been said. The closest, and this is why you find me in the appendix selected cases, that he was the closest section to the text than other translators. The other thing, what he did, the few changes which he thought that they could be more appealing to the public, the French public at that time, were made certainly with a good understanding of what is the meaning of reception and the public, the reading public, and the nobility, which he is more interested in at that time to make very good sales. So that is what he did. And this is why the appeal, without that, without it trimming here, little there, you know, the text would not be very appealing to the public. So he did the right thing, actually. And this is why you find me in the book defending him. Because what other people have been saying, and also periodical criticism of the time have been saying, they didn't understand what is there, what is in the Arabian Nights. They didn't understand that what is important for the reading public is not necessarily a kind of permanent. There is no stability in reception. This is why in my first book, that is, you find me dealing with different publics over periods of time, different tastes, and the translation is only a reflection of one taste at a certain moment when there is a different class, which was the middle class in Europe in the 19th century, for instance, could receive Edward William Lane's translation. It's different. It is for the drawing room. But the appeal, the most enduring appeal is Galan version. It is the best translation for me. Yes, incomplete, that is quite true, because that is what he had at that time. So that is one point which we need to understand. This is an important discovery for me. The other thing is not what Burton did, what John Payne did. And that could be confusing to people if we accept the idea that actually Richard Burton used John Payne as basic for a number of volumes with the approval of John Payne himself. That is also quite true. But John Payne, the style, what he tried to do is to give you a complete translation, but at the same time, an elevated, refined style of the aesthetic movement in literature. That is to say, whether they post pre-Raphaelite or something else. It doesn't matter. But that is exactly what he did. He did provide us with a new translation in the sense that he brought it to the core, to the center of literature. That is, he made it poetic and refined. That is what he did, but complete, and so on. So these are two moments in my understanding, which are very important. The third, since you are asking only for three, the third is Borges.
Okay.
Yeah, so the third is Borges, because without Borges, the postmodernist tradition cannot grow. He brought something new, and he was able to amalgamate what is available at that time in fiction writing and so on with the Arabian Nights and bring the themes together. That is to say, he was marrying the Arabian Nights to the European text. And that kind of interaction, which is very important, certainly, in order to understand that the Arabian Nights is not an outsider anymore. It is the core of literary tradition, whether in Europe or whatever. So that is what the book has been doing, certainly. It breaks the barriers, which have been standing for long in the academy, in the criticism, and so on. And it brought to the attention of people and scholars and readers, certainly, that actually when we are talking about theory, there is something great here, which you need to understand it. Only you need a little bit more patience and at the same time to be more rigorous and serious.
I actually thought your third instance was going to be John Barth and not Borges. So I wonder if you can actually talk about that as well, since you dedicate a significant amount of.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, you know, John Barth, I mentioned a lot about John Barth here, as you know, when it comes to the idea of the study of narrative. And he was an outcome of Borges. You see, that's what I'm saying. Without Borges in the 30s, there won't be a John Barth. Even if we assume that there will be a John Barth, why should he connect? I mean, maybe he didn't know. Everybody read Borges. And Borges kind of laid the road to all of them. That is what he did. So whatever developments took place in narrative, it was in the aftermath of what Borges has been doing. and so on. This is why I thought of him as the peak of understanding in criticism as in narrative of what the Arabian Nights is doing. And this is why you find him writing also 2 articles on the translations of the Arabian Nights and a general article on the Arabian Nights in relation to storytelling. And aside from the very many pieces, as you know, because it is rare to go into Borges without reading somewhere here and there something from the Arabian Nights.
In talking about Borges's relationship to the Arabian Nights, you mentioned how it treats the text as the core, as a sort of, I guess, like a global inheritance, right? It sort of transcends the orientalizing of the text. And I guess this sort of brings us to Shahrazad. So in the book, you discuss Shahrazad, you say, she roams as a narrative globetrotter, atemporal and free, and then a narrative globetrotter of a sort. Shahrazad is an ever welcome guest and host in every culture. So I think I would love to hear you talk about what character of, obviously Shahrazad exists in various characters, in fact, because, you know, for some there's the orientalizing of her, but then there is the image of her as the storyteller. And of course, that's why then a lot of Arab women writers identify with her as well. So in the same way there's a multiplicity and plurality of the text, there are multiple Shahrazad. And so I would love for you to talk about her as well.
Is the Arabian Nights reaching a good public? Let us put it this way. Reaching a good public in the Arabian Nights and the Arabian societies. I mean, is it or not? First of all, I doubt it. You know, the second issue which we have is that there was a movement, though, in the 90s in Egypt in particular, to engage with Shahrazad. But they took it, as Fadwa Multi-Douglas said, that as Shahrazad feminist. That is the whole idea. Now, so we are talking about attitudes in criticism, how a text like that, how you are going to read it, and from what angle you are reading it. So depending on interest. All of us have specific interests, certainly, and I am, as you know, enthusiastic about women issues, and I have been doing that in my writings. And anyway, but this is not the question. The question is that they haven't read Shahrazad. Well, that's the problem. That is my problem with this kind of reading. Because what we have, it is not only Shahrazad as defending, because you are taking too seriously the frame tale of the Arabian Nights. What you need to do is that, yes, Shahrazad is presented to you as a lady who has the wit and the intelligence and the wide knowledge and the beauty and whatever, the charm, in order to defeat that, and you can take this as a trope for a feminist movement. That's very good. We agree, all of us agree with that. But what else? And is this the end of the Arabian Nights? What they didn't read is the first part of the frame tale. The first part in which here is the king staying outside the palace for a night or two, feeling that he was longing for his wife, and he found his wife with somebody, and he killed her. And the other scene also with the other king, and so on. That is the 2 brothers. Now, they were killed. They were not given a voice. They don't have names in the frame tale. But without them, there won't be Shahrazad. Because the 2 kings, both of them will become morose, and the morbidity took over, and they began killing, right? That is the issue of the frame tale. So without that scene, we don't have that kind of development. And this is why I thought, no, we should begin really, even if we develop a kind of feminist approach to writing, we should be starting with that voiceless women Why did they betray their husband? There must be a reason. It can't happen just out of the blue, you know? And we should go into these problematic issues in order to understand the nature of the text. The unspoken is very important for us. These blind points are the points which criticism should take care of, and so on. And the other part of it is different. Is this the only thing in there? No, the Arabian Nights is a sequence of tales in which the issue of women is taken over and argued, but differently, different approaches, and so on. So this is why I thought, no, we should develop more than one specific perspective in order to grow larger and see exactly a kind of, there is no totality, but let us speak about it just for the sake of argument and convenience, that there is such a possibility of a totality working within that kind of narrative, and so on. So audiences then, and the issue of readership is as mixed as it is in the West. The West, I mean, in the 19th century or the 18th century, it is very difficult to speak about an audience without saying that all of them read the Arabian Nights. This cannot be said about now, you know, and it cannot be said about the Arab public also, readership. It is quite, I can give you an estimate and say that actually we have 10% of the Arabian audience, and women in particular, who read the Arabian Nights. At least before that, the older generations, they used to kind of narrate what is given to them from their grandmothers and so on. So at least, but that tradition, as you know, with the TV intrusion and so on, cut off a tradition which has been going on and so far as orality is concerned. So that is quite an issue for me. And the other issue certainly is how are we, if we are so clear, because I mean, at least publication data we have and all that kind of thing, if we are a little bit clear about the audience and reception in Europe and somehow in other parts, but are we clear about that in the third world countries and the global South? No, we don't know. We don't know. What we have is the little information which is available right now, and this cannot give us a very clear perception of what audiences we are going to talk about, and so
on. This is, I guess, less of a question, more of a comment, but I think it's striking in your answer. And in your book, sort of, you have this impulse to assert the text as text, and sort of you have a call to sort of engage with it as narrative, but also in acknowledging its place now and sort of, you know, the hyper globalized, and as you said, the advent of television and the internet and everything. The text exists, but the characters have sort of broken free. They're not like a set of free associating symbols, right? There is a certain iconography to do with Aladdin because of the Disney movies, Shahrazad, you know, regardless of the misunderstanding, there is sort of now an entire set of novels and authors that associate with her, even if you are arguing that they misunderstand her. And I think you almost acknowledge that even in the quote I read when you say Shahrazad is atemporal and free, even though narratology is so tied to temporality. So you are almost, you're on your own signaling sort of that tension, I guess. And if we're talking about reception and audiences, sort of.
Right. No, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And the whole idea is that nowadays, certainly, as I told you, I mean, every now and then new ideas will grow in my mind, and I take note of these and try to deal with them at a certain point. While I have been really finishing that book, another book I have been writing, and it came out, for instance.
Okay.
And this is Arabic Disclosures, the post-colonial the post-colonial autobiographical atlas, for instance. So you can tell, well, I mean, these are disconnected. How do they relate in your mind? It's okay. My mind works this way. I mean, in a number of fields at the same time, and I'm enjoying it this way. So it is not really, I am not the traditional kind of scholar who is dealing. I am more of the critic who is enjoying, you know, the reading and writing. And for that matter, the pursuit is livable for me in the sense that I derive a pleasure. I won't go into a project or even in teaching if it's not pleasurable for me.
I am cognizant that my time with you is running out, so I think I will ask one more question before we open it to the audience. One of the sort of the many threads that you juggle in the book is thinking about the text relationship to the orientalizing reception, as well as trying to decide what decolonizing the text means. So if you could just speak to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, to me or to the audience right now?
No, to you. Then the audience can ask their questions.
Yeah, okay. So,
yeah.
You know, I mean, when I look and try to see the whole thing itself, how it is working, and I feel that there is a readership, but we need to reach that kind of readership in one way or another. And definitely what I am driving at is how to break the barriers in the academy itself. That is, first of all, to bring Arabic texts in particular into the academy, not as if they were alien or foreign or whatever. No. I would like these to integrate into the very fabric of the academy itself, to be taken seriously alongside the most prominent things which have been read in the French or the English department or that department and so on. So that is certainly a mission for me. And I have been working through this, as the titles of my book can tell you. I have been, and luckily though, is that most of these books are having great reception. So things are going well in that kind of direction, I guess.
Okay. I think I will now open it up. I think, John, if you can come back to moderate the audience. I'm sure they have their own questions. I still have a lot of questions, so I'm happy to keep going. But.
Thank you very much, and we please feel free to ask further questions in due course. But we'll invite the audience to pose their questions as well. Just to remind everybody, there is the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen if you do wish to ask a question or make a comment, and there is the simultaneous Arabic translation of what's being said at the bottom as well. I'd like to abuse my position as chair and return to something that you mentioned, Professor, about different publics and how these have changed over time and over space. I'll confess I have no background in literary criticism. My own area of specialism is international relations and politics. So please forgive me if my questions seem naive, verging on the stupid. That's perfectly possible. But I was fascinated by the idea of there being different publics. Which public would you most like to engage with the Arabian Nights today as a manuscript, as a text? If you could convince any constituency of people, who would it be to engage most with it?
That's a very good question, John. No, that's a very good question.
Thank you very much.
I mean, had the question being asked in the 18th century, it was possible for me to define it, you know, or in the 19th century, mid-19th century, I can't tell you exactly what public specifically. Right now, we are talking about a kind of mobility, and at the same time, the difficulty of defining a specific reading public. I mean, we have the social media certainly interfering in the middle, And we can't tell if we are talking about a class, a segment of the society, or what exactly. Because with that kind of movement, it is very difficult to claim that there are specific borders. What I can say, though, right now, if we are talking about that, we are talking about actually students and academy. And the academy, you can define people right now. But right now, and this is important because we are talking about thousands of academy, right? Not one. Now, even in small countries, you find 10 universities or so on. And that kind of a large audience available for us and could be the target we are talking about. Because these people, if they come across, let us say a course or whatever, across the Arabian Nights, then they are going to read and to respond. That is different from what we understand earlier. So that is a new direction. And this direction, as I told you, cannot be defined by class distinction. No, it's different. It's different. It could be multiple kind. So an amount of diversity, which has been made available also by the social media, is here for us. And this is why we can target these specific audiences, that is the academy.
Thank you very much, and that's very interesting, and leads me on to my second follow-up question. You had the remarkable statistic as to the scale of readership in the Arab world today of the Arabian Nights. What do you think the longer-term consequences, social, political, cultural consequences could be without further engagement with this seminal work, with this seminal text?
Right now, everybody, writers and so on, will try to make a reference to the Arabian Nights. You can say this is belated also simply because they, like everything else, I mean, they came across a few things which came from either Europe or so, which is quite true, by the way. I mean, despite the fact that some of my colleagues in post-colonial research would like to say otherwise, but that is something which we need to understand in these kind of encounters. So the Arab audience in general, or scholarship, has not been taking the Arabian Nights seriously. I am a little, I mean, when I tried to the academy, certainly, and I did teach a course on the Arabian Nights when I started in Baghdad University, because that will be just impossible. It's not there. I mean, they won't believe that. They won't think seriously of that. I mean, even your colleagues around you, they won't take it seriously, and so on. So the danger to your reputation as a rigorous scholar could very much suffer in that kind of transaction. And this is why we used to avoid that. Until later, right now, yeah, there are such possibilities. There are such possibilities, you know, but even these possibilities are not as clear cut, because we know that anybody who would like to make very little trouble kind of can raise a question about such a tale or the other. You know, they don't raise it about a film that is a movie or so on, but they can raise it about something written and so on. So this is why my thinking that the Arabian Nights has not been doing great achievements in the Arab world yet. Maybe in the future, maybe with the drawing attention to these prices, and I mean, more attention will be given to such a seminal and important text, certainly.
Thank you very much. And if I may just pick up on something you mentioned there, and if please do correct me if I've got this wrong, but you intimated that there is almost a European strand, a European element to the corpus of interpretations of the Arabian Nights today. If this is the case, then what does decolonizing the text mean exactly? Is it trying to remove those elements, or is it something
Yeah,
else?
well, I mean, decolonizing, that is to say, how to liberate the text from the paraphernalia which is surrounding it. Just read it as it is, and let the reader read without any limitations, without anything imposed on the reader. Well, this doesn't mean that we don't need something like a glossary of terms or something, a footnote mentioning that this means this, a word or something. That's okay. But I'm talking about the annotation kind of, heavy kind of annotation, is that liberate the text from that, go to the primary text, that is, which were made available, and work with them. That is one thing. The other side of the question is narratology, as I mentioned earlier, is that how is it possible to bring the Arabian Nights into narratology again and make people think that as long, yes, they can talk about Rashid or Baudelaire or this or that, any poet or writer, fiction writer, but they can at the same time talk about the Arabian Nights and so on.
If I may cut in a little bit, John. I'm curious, when you said there wasn't impressive work being done in the Arab world with Arabian Nights, do you mean that critically, or do you mean in terms of like creative adaptation and sort of continuous creative engagement with it?
No, critically is okay. I mean, there is a lot of writing going on about the Arabian Nights. So there is no problem in that, but I'm still talking about the kind of reception which we are expecting. Even novelists, as you know, right now, are rediscovery, and they are rewriting some portions here and there from the Arabian Nights, motifs and so on. So there is something in that kind of direction, but how important that direction is, and whether it is taking a specific feature, this we cannot be very sure about.
My other question is, you sort of, I think it seems that you're wrestling with what a sort of decolonized version of Arabian Nights as a piece of word literature that is at the center looks like, because at times you're saying we need to recenter engagement with the text, but sort of strip it of excessive sort of footnotes
Annotation, right.
Annotations. But then there are other texts, canonical texts in classics, for example, that are dealt with in that way, and that isn't necessarily. So my question is it because it is an Eastern text that those annotations then almost take on a translator's role in mediating it culturally, and is that what you're taking offense to?
Yeah, because it is treating the text as an alien, you see. That's a problem. So you are already alienating the text because you think that this is a totally different culture. And this is why it needs your interpretation. So you are, that is, the translator in this case is imposing himself or herself on the text, trying to provide the reader a guideline. So providing the reader with a guideline in order to lead her or him through. That is the problem, as you know. It could be very misleading. I mean, what Edward William Lane did, for instance, and this will continue for some time as a tradition, is that, first of all, it was not enough for him to rewrite the Arabian Nights in a biblical style, which we know it doesn't work for the Arabian Nights. But he added that kind of corpus. Very many people in his period, in that period certainly, were very enthusiastic about that. And they were very happy, because that is what they have been looking in the Age of Empire They have been looking for that kind of information. They need it. They thought that is important for them, especially with the rise of societies for useful knowledge, they called them at that time. So very important as such. That is one side of the question, certainly. The other side, as I told you, in decolonizing is different. That is how you center it in theory itself. Why do you still continue to treat it as an alien, and so on. So all these are important issues, certainly for us, and definitely, I mean, some scholars, young scholars in particular, will be drawn to that kind of theorization sooner or later in their courses, and they will develop that kind of attitude, and that is exactly what I aim at.
I think it's striking that you keep sort of differentiating between the Western reception and the reception in the Arab world. And it seems even though the versions that we have now are mediated and annotated and sort of over-explained, and like you said, which produces the effect of alienating or making the text alien, it has been embraced in other ways, right? That's what you highlight. There is a long history of it. It's also now there is a version of it, a Western version of it in the Western consciousness. And maybe it's more developed almost in the sense that we have better archives for these things, they're more documented than we do for the Arab world, which I think is a very interesting way to think about it.
Well, I mean, you see, I mean, is there a definitive text which we are talking about? We are still talking about Bulaq edition, right? And Bulaq edition was the basic material which Edward William Lane used, for instance, and so on. And this will continue. Galan certainly was not available in the Arab world. It was only later when Brill's edition came out in the mid-1980s. And I don't think it reached the Arab world. I mean, the late Muhsin Mehdi sent me a copy to Baghdad when it appeared, and so on. So it was not available. We are talking about something which was not available. And so it is either the Bulaq edition or Matba al-Catholikiya, as they call it, the Catholic print edition, which is trimmed and made nice, but very popular too at that time. So that is what we have. That is what we have open. In Europe, there is a tradition. Certainly, there is a tradition. We are talking about, as I told you, early 18th century. And so we are talking about 300 years or more. That is a long legacy, very enduring, certainly, and it's not going to end. This is why it is part of the consciousness. Whether they like it or not, it doesn't matter, but it is there. Maybe earlier, it was more focused in the memory itself because of the limitation of no social media, no TV, no nothing. The availability is only of a print. And for that matter, this is exactly what is enduring in their memory and so on. And we know that memory as such is important for us. So anyway, so that's what I'm saying. And this can grow and kind of grow certainly differently in the current period, which we are witnessing right now. As I said, the post-capitalist, the post-industrialist period. So that is what we have. In the Arab world, as I told you, the mixed case, it is very mixed case, simply because what we have, we are talking about two. Bulaq edition, Dar Sadr is reprinting it very many times right now. After Al-Muthanna, bookstore, Qasim Al-Rijab in Baghdad, who at that time attempted to reprint what is made available. He reprinted the Bulaq edition, and for a long time, it was Al-Muthanna's edition, which was popular in the Arab world, aside, as I told you, from the Catholic one, and so on. Right now, I don't know if we can claim that one of them is very popular also, simply because there are other directions and so on. And yeah, so that is almost the case. This is why I cannot define very clearly the case in the Arab world. At the same time, I don't have the statistics, you see, that can tell me publication number, whatever. This kind of detail is not. However, I must mention though, and admit that two Arab scholars in Paris who worked in the library there, or affiliated in one way or another with it, have compiled the criticism written in Arabic about the Arabian Nights. So that is very good. That is very good. As I told you, I have been struggling with that and so on, but because the availability of the material in front of them helped them, and the new technology certainly helped them a lot in order to reach that kind of understanding. And the compilation is good.
I have another question, which is, when you were just talking earlier, you said, we're talking about a 300-year legacy. It's enduring and it will endure, beyond this moment. And that said, that sort of at least 200 of those years, we can, as you have said time and again, partly it's the prominence of print culture, which, in this post-industrial, post-capitalist world is in crisis, essentially. There is a crisis of print culture. That's why it's not as read as much.
Right.
So if going back to the title of this event, sort of enduring legacies, if you could talk about the other sort of forms that the Arabian Nights takes on, whether that be, visually, which you address in your book, in terms of adaptation and visual.
Could be, I mean, if you look at the TV serialization, you can tell that there were efforts to bring the Arabian Nights to the TV, especially Ramadan and whatever. But bad production. That is in the sense that these people are not really aware of the complexity of the Arabian Nights, and they are also for cheap conception. So they are not really doing an effort in that kind of direction. What you need people who write very good scenarios, who can work with selected tales or all the tales, and can make an effort, like like some efforts at the theater in England. Tim Sipple, for instance, did that, and so on. So I mean, something can be done, but it is not done yet, and that is my question. You are definitely right that the print industry is not necessarily anymore the most dominant form. That's quite true. The digital is available. The Arabian Nights itself is available in digital forms and so on. And different productions can be also available and so on. That is, yes. And certainly the new element, I mean, the painting, illustration. The Arabian Nights is still inviting illustrators. Look at the cover. The cover here is by Jawad Salim. Jawad Salim, the most famous and the prominent Iraqi painter. And you can tell that it was drawn in the late 50s, early 60s, and so on. This is part of the writing, by the way, is part of the painting. And so on. So illustration is very important because we are talking about visuality as part of the reception itself. And as such, the Arabian Nights is receiving something good in that direction.
Can you talk about what you think is good about that direction?
There is a history for that because in Europe in particular, along with the translations, they realize that the readership can connect better with the illustration. And as such, you find the translator working with an illustrator in order to come up with an edition that has very many engravings or illustrations and so on, like what Edward Lemlin did with William Harvey, for instance, and so on. So you find all of them going to particular painters and illustrators and work with them. Remember that painting, I mean, illustration is also not systematic in the sense that at a certain point, the print industry is not the same as we know it right now. At a certain point, it is not. It was very difficult, actually, to include a painting and so on. And this is why you find black and white and all that kind of thing. By the end of the 19th century, colored illustrations will appear and so on, along with the development itself in print industry. With the 20th century, early on and later, there will be more developments, and as such, we find more attention to color and so on. But at the same time, a different understanding also is taking place alongside the new attitudes in painting, the new schools in painting, and so on. So if we speak about Chagall, we are no longer speaking about Letchford. We are talking about different attitudes and different painters and illustrators, and they feel that they can even produce a volume which is independent of writing, and that is exactly what happened. So you find Chagall's paintings separate in a volume, and so on, and very many of them began to do the same thing. And that is, as I told you, because they feel that actually, in these illustrations, they are telling the Arabian Nights.
It's interesting that you think the annotations take away from the Nights, but the sort of the early editions with the illustrations aren't a form of annotation in themselves, because this one.
That is a very intelligent, certainly, of you to notice how can we draw a comparison. It is a different direction. That is, we are no longer talking about authenticity or faithfulness. We are talking about somebody who is hijacking the effort altogether, and the text becomes her or his. So it is no longer there. It is something new. And this is why the post-maturation kind of attitude is taking place. So we are no longer talking about what is authentic, what is faithful, what is exact. No. There is something different. That is, there is an attitude in which the painter, as such, is an independent figure who might take a lead from something and work accordingly. And that is what they have been doing. If they go to a poem by such and such poet, they go also to the Arabian Nights and pick on something and work with it. And that is the end of the story.
Thank you very much. Absolutely fascinating questions and answers as well. And I must admit, I've learned a lot about the difference between annotation and illustration, and in terms of the direction and influence on the text. We've been going for well over an hour, so I think it's probably time to draw things to a close. We've put you on the spot for all that time. There are many advantages to having holding events like this via Zoom, via remote means, not least because we can have speakers from all around the world and audience members. One of the disadvantages is that it's much harder to show our appreciation. So I hope you will, you can imagine at the moment thunderous applause in gratitude for your answers and your commentary this evening. And also for you, Haya, for your questions and for guiding and shaping the discourse. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Haya, for your.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Congratulations on your prize winning as well.
Thank you all. Thank you. You take care.
Thank you very much, and a very good evening to everybody.